All right, we are here with Bearcat Sports Network correspondent and in-studio host, Mr. Alex Tabor, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. And today, Alex, we're talking a little bit of PowerPoints. I hope that's interesting for you.
Oh yeah, this has been a lifelong interest of mine, dating back to when they started doing the PowerPoints, circa 2003, 2004 or so.
Well, my apologies for my voice. I have come up with something here over the last couple days. I messaged Coach Patterson, who I typically interview on either Monday or Tuesday prior to our radio show, and said, Coach, let's wait till Tuesday this week. You guys have been scoring too much, and my voice is almost gone. So give me another day to do our interview. So I'm going to try to power through this thing. So Alex, in most places, when it comes to standings in high school, you look at a team's win-loss record to determine their playoff seeding, who they play. But the VHSL uses this system called PowerPoints to determine the playoff seeds. So, as a longtime fan and follower of Southwest Virginia football, give us your thoughts on this system.
Personally, I love it. You compare it to, say, in the state of Tennessee, it's all based on just your conference games or your district games. So Tennessee High, for example, plays in Region 5A, Class 5A, Region 1. And so as I think there's six teams in their conference and the top four go to the playoffs. So you pretty much know going into the year, it doesn't matter who you play out of conference in Tennessee, as long as you win two district games, you're going to the playoffs.
Mhm.
And in Virginia, like I said, they've done it like this for a long time. The PowerPoint system is meant to reward you for playing harder out of conference opponents and also, thereby sort of penalize you if you're playing, all cupcakes more or less. And so I'm all for it. I love the PowerPoint system. It does get a little interesting late season trying to figure out, who's in and who's out and looking at where you're going to be going first round, but I think that's part of the magic of it.
Well, the most recent PowerPoints came out today with one game left for everybody. Some schools are done with their schedules, but just one week left before the playoffs. And the updated PowerPoints at the moment, Graham is currently first. Their average is 26.2. Union is second. Their average is 23.5. Ridgeview is third. They're an even 22 points average. Lebanon is fourth, 21.2 points. Virginia High coming in fifth at the moment with 20.7. So they're a half a point average behind Lebanon, very close margin. Gate City is sixth at 19 and a half points. Lee is seventh at 18.2. And Tazewell has the eighth spot, 17.4. The teams below Tazewell, from what we understand, Alex, it seems like Wise Central, Richlands, John Battle, and Marion are too far behind Tazewell to reach the playoffs. We know who our eight teams are. We just don't know who is playing who just yet.
Exactly. And that's kind of different than how it has been in recent years, where there's usually some drama between 7 through 9 as to who's going to get those last couple of spots. But this year it turned out pretty chalk. Central, had they won last week, would have had mathematically a chance to still get in. But at this point, it's all the top eight are set. It's just a matter of who's going to get those spots in which order. So.
This is my third year calling Virginia High football and learning about the PowerPoint system fairly recently. I have an appreciation for it because I understand, in a way, how difficult it can be to understand. And so I'm just now coming to a place where I'm starting to understand it. I think I told you earlier, I predicted this week's PowerPoints and nailed them correctly. So I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to understand this formula. So for those who may not be as aware, here is how the points are tallied up. So for each game, each team receives a game value or a point value for each game. So the rules are if you win against a Class 2 opponent, which is what most of Virginia High's opponents are, Class 2, you get 18 points. If you lose against a Class 2 opponent, you get 6 points. Easy enough. Now, If you play a Class 1 opponent such as Patrick Henry, like Virginia High played earlier this year, you get 16 points for a win there instead of 18, and you get 4 points for a loss instead of 6 points for a loss to a Class 2 opponent. However, they've added in these 2 bonus points when you play a team below your class to sort of incentivize teams to schedule lower classes. Because, Alex, it seems to me that if there wasn't an incentive to play schools from another class, some of these teams would have a hard time finding games.
Exactly, and that especially comes into play with Abingdon. They're the only Class 3 school to the west of Montgomery County, or Pulaski County, actually. And their entire district is Class 2 teams. So before they had the bonus points rule, Abingdon could have run the table in the Mountain 7, and they were still getting, fifth or sixth seed in Region 3D. So they, along with some other teams in the state in similar circumstances, kind of lobbied for that to be changed. And you look now, of course, Abingdon is having a really good season anyway, but they are actually number one in Region 3D, undefeated in the district, 8-1 overall. Their only loss being to a certain school in Bristol, Tennessee.
Mm.
Um, and prior to this rule being changed, they would have been probably around the fourth or fifth seed in 3D.
So some of these Mountain 7 schools in Region 2D, they in a way kind of have a built-in advantage playing Abingdon, because it's not often that teams will play a Class 3 opponent, but when they do, if they were to beat a Class 3 opponent, which Abingdon counts as, even though they're in the Mountain 7, you get 20 points for a win against a Class 3 team, whereas only 18 for a Class 2. So even all these Mountain 7 teams that have lost to Abingdon this year because they've run the table on the Virginia side, they get 8 points for a loss to Abingdon instead of six. So that does help their numbers a little bit because they already have a built-in game against a higher level school based on enrollment. So then we get into the fun part of this, because if you just looked at every game as win or loss, you either get 18 points or 6 points in most scenarios versus Class 2 opponents. It'd be a lot easier to figure this out. But the next level to this is that there is a bonus point value for how many wins your opponents have. As an example, Marion is Virginia High's game this week. Marion does not have a win this year. So if Virginia High beats Marion, excuse me, they'll get 18 points for the win, but they'll get 0 points for the bonus because Marion has no wins. However, if Virginia High, like last week, Virginia High beat John Marshall. John Marshall is a Class 2 opponent. Virginia High got 18 points for that win, but they also got 4 bonus points because John Marshall had won 2 games, and because Virginia High beat John Marshall, you get 2 points per that opponent's win. So 18 plus 4 is 22 points for that game. Um, Virginia High lost to Radford earlier this year, another Class 2 opponent. Virginia High got 6 points for the loss, but every time Radford wins, you get 1 point additional. And that really messes up the ability to try to predict who might end up where. It really complicates things, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny too, being here on the state line, again, we'll talk about Abingdon for a second because, classifications for different states are different. Tennessee High is a 5A school in Tennessee, and comparison, Greenville and Elizabethton are 3A schools in Tennessee. But when you look at the chart the VHSL uses, VHSL considers Greenville, Elizabethton, and Tennessee all high to all be 3A schools. And
Mhm.
so it's very interesting, all the tracking that has to go into play for all of this. Because you also have to track, these out-of-state teams, you have to track their schedule as well. So
Yeah. And that's the thing I think that maybe a lot of people don't understand is that looking back, like the Ridgeview game, and we'll get to this in just a second. Virginia High played Ridgeview earlier this year. Ridgeview's got 7 wins right now. So the game value for that game for Virginia High, they lost that game. They get 6 points for a loss to a Class 2 opponent, but they get 7 bonus points because the team that beat them, Ridgeview, has 7 wins. So if Ridgeview beats Gate City this week, that win becomes more valuable, even though we're way past that Ridgeview game. Virginia High, in a way, is rooting for Ridgeview because If Ridgeview wins, that helps Virginia High's point total. So how this really breaks down when you're looking at how to compare these teams and see where they might end up is yes, Virginia High and Lebanon, they share a lot of opponents, but those games that the teams that they haven't played, what we might call non-common opponents, those are kind of the teams we're keeping an eye on to see where Virginia High might end up seated.
Exactly, yeah, and that's why, we'll be keeping an eye on, some of these 1A games because Lebanon, by the fact that they're in, Russell County, they play Castlewood and Honaker, who are two, Class 1 teams having very different seasons. Honaker right now, just looking, is fourth in Region 1D, so they're probably most likely going to get a home playoff game, whereas Castlewood is in, looks like 11th at
Mm,
2-7. So even though, ordinarily we wouldn't care necessarily what happens in
yes.
their game. I don't remember who they play, but
East
all of a
side.
sudden now we are invested in what happens there because if Castlewood does somehow win, that is one less potential point for Lebanon to have over us.
All right. So now that we've gone over this overview of how PowerPoints work, let's talk about what Virginia High's real life scenarios look like for the first round of the playoffs. Right now, we know Virginia High is the number 5 seed. If they stay at the 5 seed, they'll go on the road and play the number 4 seed, which is currently Lebanon, in the first round of the playoffs. But some of this stuff is up for grabs. Now, the three major games we're keeping an eye on this week are Lebanon and Tazewell, Ridgeview and Gate City, and of course, Virginia High and Marion. Now, Virginia High would have to win for any of these scenarios to exist. You would think they'd be a heavy favorite in this game because Marion has not won a game this year. Virginia High is looking to go 7-3. Anything can happen. That's why they play the games. But for this conversation, let's assume Virginia High wins this week. And the question we're wondering is it possible for Virginia High to get the number 4 seed and potentially host a home playoff game? So let's look at the points. So at the moment, we told you Lebanon is just a little bit above Virginia High in terms of the points. What does that really look like? Well, Lebanon has 191 points on the season. Virginia High has 187. So it's a 4 point difference between these two teams. You divide that by 9, and that's how you get that small margin. So Virginia High needs to make up 4 points to pass Lebanon. Is it possible? Yes. Let's look at the scenarios. So Lebanon has 191 points. They play Tazewell this week. If Lebanon beats Tazewell, they'll get 18 points for the game value. But then they'll get 8 points because Tazewell has 4 wins. Multiply that by 2. That's 18 plus 8, 26 points to Lebanon's total, which gives them 217 points without factoring in any other games. That is, quick math, 30 points higher than Virginia High before you factor in their game against Marion. So what's hurting Virginia High this week is that Marion has no wins. If Virginia High does win, they'll get the 18 points, but they'll still be 12 points back of Lebanon with not a lot of ways to make up that gap. It seems like if Lebanon wins, they are going to finish ahead of Virginia High this year.
Yes, so like I said, it's almost mathematically set in that way that as long as Lebanon wins, they will host a home playoff game, whether it's us or Ridgeview. So
Yep. Now, the more fun scenario for Virginia High fans. What happens if Lebanon loses to Tazewell this week? Well, with a loss to a Class 2 team, you get 6 points added to your total. And then you would get 1 point for each Tazewell win, which would be 5 if Tazewell beats Lebanon. That would be 11 points added to Lebanon's total, which would bring them to 202 points. If Virginia High wins against Marion and gets those 18 points with a win, they're sitting at 205 points. So Virginia High would be up by 3 against Lebanon, but then it gets interesting with the common games. The non-common opponents, let's call them that. The games were focused on Honaker, Castlewood, and Rural Retreat, three Class 1 teams in Virginia. are the only three teams that are on Lebanon's schedule that are not on Virginia High's. So the only way Lebanon can make up that 3 point gap is to earn 3 points from those three games. For them, Honaker and Rural Retreat play each other. So they can only get a maximum of 2 points from those two schools. So what they would need to pass Virginia High is for Honaker or wipe the Honaker Rural Retreat game. One of those teams is going to win. So that gets them 1 point behind Virginia High. Then Lebanon would need Castlewood to beat Eastside, which seems unlikely, but let's say it does happen. And Lebanon jumps Virginia High by a point. Well, the only other opponent that Virginia High has playing this week that they can earn a point on is Ridgeview against Gate City. So, in a scenario where Castlewood did beat Eastside and Ridgeview did beat Gate City, you're looking at a dead tie, and I'm going to assume that Virginia High would have the tiebreaker over Lebanon because they beat them in the regular season. We don't know that for sure, but you can see why things are going to get really interesting if that happens.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you alluded to, every region has their own tiebreakers. They decide it, before before the scheduling cycle begins for each 2 year cycle. And I don't know particularly what they decide is the tiebreaker, but I would have to imagine if you have two teams that played each other, you'd go by head to head. I can't really think of anything else that would make sense in that space, but in the scenario that we do find ourselves in that area, we'll cross that
Yeah.
bridge when we get there. But
So basically, the summary there is if Lebanon beats Tazewell, Virginia High cannot catch them. If if Tazewell beats Lebanon and Virginia High wins, they've got a really good shot at jumping Lebanon. And Castlewood versus Eastside. If that game goes to Eastside, then Virginia High's got the higher seed than Lebanon. One final scenario here, that is Gate City. They play Ridgeview this week. Ridgeview is too far ahead of Virginia High to catch at this point. So playing through or what a Ridgeview loss might mean, or a Ridgeview win, well, sorry, a loss might mean for them. Virginia High can't catch Ridgeview. But what Virginia High might have to look out for is if Gate City beats Ridgeview, Gate City could potentially jump Virginia High because that win over Ridgeview would be worth so many points. At the moment, Virginia High has 187 points, as we said. Gate City is sitting at 176. And you may say that seems pretty far behind. But if Gate City were to beat Ridgeview, they get 18 points for the win. They get 14 bonus points because Ridgeview has won 7 games. Give them 32 additional points. Now they're sitting at 208. If Virginia High beats Marion, we're sitting at 205. So Gate City has passed Virginia High with a win over Ridgeview, which would knock Virginia High down to the 6th seed potentially. And then it comes down to a couple of other games, and it would be really close to call. Patrick Henry is a game on Virginia High's schedule that they'd really be rooting for them. Graham plays Richlands. You'd think you'd get one there. And you're going to get 2 points from Lebanon or Tazewell in that game. So Virginia High will boost their score up. Some of the games we'd be watching for Gate City include Middlesboro, Kentucky, who plays Knox Central, Abingdon versus Lee, Union versus John Battle, and then Y Central versus Grundy. But as we said, Alex, what's wild about this system is the game that could decide whether Virginia High stays above Gate City or does not could take place between two Kentucky teams this week.
exactly, yeah. And one thing that I did notice too, I don't know if you saw this, but the way the VHSL is counting the bonus points, the rider points for Gate City's win over Middlesboro is actually one lower than what we expected because Middlesboro played a private school in Kentucky that the VHSL does not recognize as being a full football playing member of the KHSAA. I think it's the organization in Kentucky. So they actually are getting slightly penalized by playing Middlesboro since they played a weaker private school themselves. So that could also come into play as well.
So, all that said, those are some of the scenarios for the PowerPoint system. We hope we haven't confused you too much. If you need to go back and listen again or watch again, please do so. If you have questions, please let us know. But please know that during the game on Friday night, We're going to have all these scenarios laid out for you. We're going to be keeping a very close eye on the scoreboard, and we should know within minutes of Virginia High's final buzzer on what seed we expect them to be and who we expect them to play. The easy thing is, there's a pretty easy scenario, and that is if it goes chalk and the teams that are expected to win, we'll be able to pretty much tell you pretty quickly where Virginia High is going to play and who they're going to play. But if things get a little chaotic and the door opens for Virginia High to potentially host a home playoff game, it might be kind of like election night, Alex. We might have to really look at it closely before we make a call.
Yeah, exactly. Florida, 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 as Tim Russert said. So
Well, with this interview airing on election night for our Bear Chat radio show, it is apropos, I guess, as uh, why not with the election tallying results coming up tonight? Why not also think through all the scenarios on what the PowerPoints could look like this weekend? So, well, Alex, thank you for joining us all the way from Phoenix. Appreciate your time. And thank you for helping us learn a little bit more about what this looks like. And hopefully, we get some good news on Friday.
yes, sir. Thank you, Chris, and looking forward to seeing you all or hearing you all, letting you all hear me with the Popeyes regional scoreboard update.
All right. Thanks, Alex.